Hey, hey, hey! Guten Tag. Welcome back to Walking with Giants, guys. I wanted to pump out a video before Christmas, so I got something for you for Christmas, but I'm a little late. Hopefully you're still on your winter holiday, and you get to see this. So, around 230,000 years ago, Northeast China went through a period of warmth. A temperate interlude in the middle of a glacial period, or a brief interglacial period, right? It was during the Ice Age, and there was a period where there was a lot of warm air. The climate was warm. Around 230,000 years ago in Northeast China. Probably all around the world, it was warm, but we're talking about Northeast China today. So, Northeast China, or Harbin, is known for its icy rivers in winter. But during that warm period, it was a landscape of marshes, grasslands, and thick deciduous forests, teeming with life. It was a land full of megafauna, including various hominids. Megafauna such as woolly rhinos, mammoths, mastodons, all of them, saber-toothed cats, whatever. They had hyenas, right? Ice Age hyenas, everything. Very biodiverse. The Harbin man, or Dragon Man, was discovered by a Chinese laborer during the Japanese occupation. So a long time ago, right? During the Sino-Japanese War. During World War II. So it was discovered by a man, an unknown man, during that time, and it was hidden away in a well until now. When the skull was discovered, it was discovered along the river by a construction guy building a bridge or whatever, and it was discovered in mud. It was buried in deep sediment. And he hid it in a well, and up until now, where it's being analyzed. The man who discovered the massive skull vanished. However, in 2018, the man's grandson returned the skull and gave it over to authorities. Retrieved the skull. He retrieved the skull and gave it to authorities and scientists. It is the best preserved archaic skull found in East Asia. The skull is immense, with a cranial capacity of 1,400 or 1,400 cubic centimeters, rivaling that of Homo sapiens, and displaying a strange blend of features, such as a thick, prominent brow ridge, a broad and flat face, and a large nasal aperture, suggesting cold adaptation. Now, I know in my previous video I said that the large nose may not necessarily have been a cold adaptation, but let's just go with, this information here for now. And large teeth. You have large teeth, which is a common thing in proto-humans and ancient hominids. We have large teeth. We gotta break bones. We gotta eat tough things, right? Just like Native Americans, indigenous Native Americans here in Canada and North America, whatever, they have big teeth. They have big features as part of their phenotype. They have bigger teeth than us. Yet, its overall proportions are surprisingly modern. So this man 230,000 years ago has some modern features as well, despite the caveman features. A face that bridges epochs, right? From the ancient man to now. It's a bridge in between. Or a frozen mosaic of evolution, right? It actually has all sorts of DNA in it, which we'll get to. Dating of sediments stuck to the nasal cavity placed the fossil at 140,000 years old to 309,000 years old. That's the fall of Atlantis. Most likely around 230,000 years ago, during the heart of the aforementioned interglacial warm period, because the oceans, whatever. This allowed the species to establish a foothold in places normally too cold for life. The Harbin lineage may have arisen in isolation here, adapting to ecological pressures of the region. So what lineage does the dragon man represent? In this, here you'll hear me mention the Harbin man, the Longi man, the dragon man, and maybe even another name for him. I use these terms interchangeably. We're talking about the same specimen, the skull that's been found in Harbin, China. But I use these terms interchangeably to get you used to the names. So when you see these names in the future, you'll know we're talking about this Chinese Denisovan found in Harbin. And in Chinese, long or long means dragon. So if you see anything with the word long in it, maybe you know a Chinese dude and his last name is Long. In southern China, it's a common last name, right? It means dragon. So he was found next to the Dragon River, the Longi River or something, which is why part of his name is Longi Man. And obviously Dragon Man is the English interpretation of it. Oh, my rice is ready. Unplug that. Alright. So what lineage does he represent? At first, he was classified as his own species, named the Longi Man after the Dragon River near which he was found. Despite the lack of DNA in his dense cranial bone, scientists managed to extract mitochondrial DNA from his dental target, his plaque. Their results were unmistakable. The dragon man belonged to the Denisovan. We talked about that in my previous videos. He actually has Neanderthal DNA in him, most likely as well. He's a mix of everything, but he's mostly Denisovan. A very large skull. Just like the girl Lucy discovered in Denisova cave in Siberia, right? We discovered her pinky finger. That's all we found. And then that's, up until now, that's that and the jawbone from Taiwan or Tibet or whatever. One piece of jawbone, like Jake Paul's fracture, that little bit is all we had of Denisovan and the pinky bone. Up until now. Now we have a complete skull. And this changes everything, right? As prior to this discovery, Denisovan were only known by very fragmented bones, right? The pinky bone from the girl Lucy in the Denisova cave and a bit of mysterious DNA in East Asians, right? So if you've taken 23andMe or Ancestry or whatever, you might notice that, especially if you're East Asian, I guess, or Native American, you might have a big chunk of unknown DNA. So you paid $200 to get your DNA test, and then they tell you, well, we don't really know what you are. There's 10% of you. I think for me it was like over 10% of unknown DNA. And, my ex and I, we both took the DNA test. We were talking about how, we're aliens. We both had this missing DNA, this ghost DNA. And she's Native American, right? Most Native Americans here in North America are white, or half white. Or 75% European ancestry, right? So for her to have 6 to 10% unknown DNA and still have maybe 60-70% European ancestry means that maybe her Native American portion of her DNA has such a high percentage of unknown DNA that even though her native DNA is so diluted, there's still such a large chunk of unknown DNA. And what was so strange is that even though she was, I don't want to go talk too much about her, it's kind of private information, but she was Ojibwe. She was Anishinaabeg. Ani, how are you? But she was Anishinaabeg, and she almost had as much Manchurian DNA. Manchuria, China. She almost had as much Manchurian DNA as me, which was only maybe 13% or something, right? Because my mom is not Manchurian, my dad is Manchurian. Maybe he had 26% Manchurian DNA or something. But I swear to God, she had like 9% Manchurian DNA, despite maybe being 20% Native American, 25% Native American. What is this saying, bro? The Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe people here in Ontario, were Manchurian? Like I said in my previous videos, the more you know, sometimes the more questions you have, and oftentimes because we've forgotten our history, we are a species with amnesia. Sometimes our history may be a lot more complicated than we think because we don't have the overall picture. So I just wanted to kind of illustrate that how, this unknown part of our DNA may be related to the Denisovan because we've kind of mapped out the Neanderthal genome, and we can look at ourselves and, like, for example, I'm 99 percentile Neanderthal. So perhaps I'm 4 to 5% Neanderthal or something, right? I'm 99 percentile Neanderthal, which means out of 100 people that have taken 23andMe, out of 100 people that have taken 23andMe, I have more Neanderthal DNA than 99 or 100 of them. The most. The Harbin skull gave them a face, a complete skull to study and classify. These people were not some obscure fringe dwellers. They were robust, adaptable, and genetically influential across the breadth of Asia. Denisovan DNA is spread throughout Asia, East Asia, the islands, the southern islands, Polynesia. They all have Denisovan DNA. In fact, by taking my ancestry test, I was actually able to find my mom's, have information on my mom's haploid group, which is a very ancient, because she's from Sichuan, China. I talked about this in my previous videos. She has some ancient DNA from islanders, from people living on the islands in, Pacific Rim, Southern Asia. And then they migrated into China across the oceans, and that's what brought their DNA there. And I'm thinking that there's Denisovan lineage in that as well, since the Denisovan were so common in Southern Asia as well. It's very interesting stuff. They bred with Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and their children were fertile, unlike many hybrids, such as mules or ligers, right? A mule is a donkey and a horse. They mate, and then they create a mule, but the mule is infertile, right? It's barren or whatever. It can't breed with another mule to create a mule. The only way to make a mule is by finding a horse and a donkey. Same with ligers, right? Bigger than the lion and the tiger, but a liger can't mate with another liger to make another liger. It's infertile. In fact, I believe that a Neanderthal female is not able to mate with a Homo sapien to create offspring, right? But a Neanderthal male is able to mate with another proto-human, a Homo sapien, and create offspring. So all Neanderthals, modern day people with Neanderthal DNA like me, our lineage came from a Neanderthal male mating with a human female, not the other way around. Plus, it would be the males that are going out and mating, right? The females are, in the cave. So they were fertile. Their genes live on in modern Melanesians, East Asians, and some indigenous American groups. Of course, because we share DNA, East Asians and indigenous Americans. You look at Yakut, Russia. You look at Siberia. You look at the indigenous populations there, and what you'll notice is that they what am I talking about? Oh yeah. In Russia, the indigenous populations, their culture is the same. It's almost the same as the indigenous groups here in Canada. What they wear, their dresses, they herd reindeer. They live off reindeer. The way they look, it's very similar to the indigenous here in North America, which makes me think that somehow they made their way east from Siberia, through Mongolia, whatever, into northern China, Harbin, China. Some went south into the islands. Maybe somehow they made their crosses ocean, Melanesia, Polynesia, and into British Columbia or whatever, the U.S. Western coastline, and therefore you get the Haida groups, the ocean-faring natives with their seafaring canoes, their big seafaring canoes, the Haida people of the West Coast, and then maybe some made their way over the Bering Land, the land bridge, and down through Alaska, we have the Clovis culture, very ancient culture, and then there were subsequent migratory groups, and I'm thinking this is similar people in different waves of migrations. One migration, and maybe over tens or hundreds of years, another migration, and therefore we get all the a variety and different groups, different tribes of Native Americans. So the previous assumption of Denisovan as a completely separate species is no longer attainable. They were human in every aspect, right? We can mate with them and create fertile offspring, right? So our genetics are the same, right? Mostly the same, just tweaked, right? Some genes switched on, some genes switched off, but we were genetically similar enough to create offspring. During the fertile warm period, 230,000 years ago, rivers surged, and forests and herds of animals migrated northwards because it was warm. And this northern part of China, there's mountains. It's at that time it was frozen. It doesn't really allow much. It's not a good area for travel. Once you get, remember in my previous videos, you'll know that once you get into China through the Heshi corridor, over the Himalayas, if you can get over the Himalayas, or you come in through Mongolia, and then the mountains or whatever, it's very hard to get into China. Or if you're in China, in eastern China, you're not getting out of there. China was so isolated for so long, and that's why China developed its culture, and the people developed the way they are due to genetic isolation. That's why we look so different from the rest of the world, right? We were cut off. And so were these ancient hominids. So were these ancient people until this warm period, until this Inter-Glacial period, where they followed the animals northwards, and then, they kind of expanded their range throughout Asia. So herds of animals and even forests moved northwards created an environment where archaic humans flourished. They were obviously a heavily meat-based diet. They're following herds of animals. Think about Native Americans, the plains Native Americans, or think about with the buffalo, right? Think about Yakutians in Russia, like the indigenous people herding reindeer, right? Or think about Mongolians living off horses, horse meat, goats, right? They're a meat-based diet. What vegetables are you going to eat in Mongolia? Is there a lot of plant matter, vegetables to eat in the plains? Probably not. Not until we started farming them, like corn and stuff, right? But they're eating buffalo. They're like a 90% meat-based diet, maybe some berries. So these archaic humans flourished during this time in Asia. They made tools, cooked food, made fires, hunted game, and may have even practiced symbolic behavior. I'm not sure what this means, but maybe like symbolic behavior, like rituals and ceremony for the dead, praying for the food you eat, thanking whatever you believe in for providing you sustenance. This is how indigenous people in North America live. And this is how I think of these people, right? They even practice symbolic behavior. Just like how our indigenous Americans lived 300 years ago. 300 years ago they were doing this, right? Until European settlers came, they were living in hide teepees, whatever, right? Made of animal hide, making fire. A very simple life. The Harbin man was not an exception. They were part of a regional expansion. Some believe that the Harbin man, or the dragon man, may have been an early mix of northern Chinese Homo northern Chinese Homo erectus. Now we're going back into time. She has even more archaic DNA from the erectus. A million years ago, the erectus traced back million years ago. So do the Denisovan and Neanderthal, right? It's just that, the Denisovan and Neanderthal were here until more present time, right? Even 10,000, 15,000 years ago, bro, I'm sure you will find somebody with close to 100% Neanderthal DNA 20,000 years ago, during the end of the last ice age. They were still here, but the erectus was diluted. Maybe they're diluted into our genes, but the 100% erectus is gone. That was more a million years ago. But this Denisovan may have had some erectus DNA, and quite a significant portion. We'll get into that. So, they say that he might have been the early mix of northern Chinese Homo erectus and Denisovan groups, explaining its echo of archaic traits and modern traits, like the 1 million year old Yonging skull. That's another skull. I'm going to have to look into that. That might have had a lot of erectus DNA. But it's similar to that, where it had both. Along with other Denisovan specimens, such as in Denisova cave in Siberia, and a jawbone discovered in Taiwan. We talked about this. I believe it was Taiwan, or I've heard it was Tibet. Maybe somebody can correct me on that. We can fill in missing links, including ghost DNA in previous Denisovan specimen, because we only had a pinky bone and a jawbone, right? A broken off jawbone. We do not have their genome mapped out, so most of their DNA is missing DNA, and it's ghost DNA, right? So we can now fill in the missing links, including ghost DNA in previous Denisovan specimen, giving them context and kin. We have more to work with. Another relative found in Harbin. The expansion of Denisovan throughout Asia has been linked to the eastward migration of Neanderthals from the Caucasus Mountains, just like how they expanded eastwards. And our previous notion was that all Neanderthal DNA in Asia came from the west, came from the Caucasus Mountains. After the Outer Africa theory, we crossed Caucasus Mountains, bred with Neanderthals, taking Homo sapien DNA and Neanderthal DNA into Asia. Well, maybe that's not the full picture here. Maybe that's not the picture at all, because maybe we had Neanderthals and Denisovan in Asia, and maybe we even had proto-humans in Asia. Maybe we had Homo sapiens in Asia. Maybe the Outer Africa theory isn't 100% correct. But the expansion of these Denisovan in East Asia is likened to the expansion of Neanderthals eastward. And it's also likened to the Outer Africa Homo sapien theory, right? They expanded Outer Africa, colonized the world. They were most likely the dominant hominid species of the north, making Asia an integral part in the evolution of the modern man, as much as Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, right? Neanderthals, Denisovan, and perhaps Homo erectus were not genetic dead ends. So the Homo erectus may still exist in us. If we are descended from Denisovans and human hybrids, then maybe part of our ghost DNA, that 10% 23andMe they can't figure out. Well, maybe I got some erectus in me too. Look at my cheekbones and flat face. I'll get into that. With their DNA living on in modern man. To me, the dragon man looks very archaic, but very Asian. Let me explain. Being a Homo sapien Denisovan hybrid with perhaps a smudge of Homo erectus features, the dragon man skull carries aspects of a rugged, large, and stocky Denisovan, right? Their skulls are massive, twice the size of a human being skull, a Homo sapien skull, because they had such large, robust faces, right? Maybe the cranial volume was similar to a human Homo sapiens, but the rest of the skull adds to the size. So, the dragon man skull carries aspects of a rugged and large, stocky Denisovan, relatively large Neotenous skull, which is broad and flat at the top, like modern Asians, right? The typical look of modern Asian. Just look at me. Or Homo sapien, and the broad and flat face with a concave or flat nasal bridge from the Homo erectus. Also a trait in modern Asians, right? It's kind of the trait of a modern Asian. It's a flatter face, a less pronounced nasal bridge, or concave nasal bridge, whatever, flat. And that might have came from the erectus. To me, the dragon man paints, because if you look at maybe depictions of Denisovan from before, or especially if we look at Neanderthals, they have high pronounced nasal bridges. This dragon man doesn't. In fact, he has such a pronounced brow ridge and lack of a nasal bridge that it's a very stark contrast to the high nasal bridge look. To me, the dragon man paints a perfect picture of how modern Asians came to be. This is where we come from, guys. There is no theory that states when archaic Homo sapiens started cooking. And so this is my input from here on, right? I was just kind of copy and pasting to, relay this information to you. Now, this is what I think. So there's no theory that states archaic Homo sapiens, mankind, started cooking and processing our food. When we did that, when we cooked and processed our food, making it easier to eat, digest, we no longer needed such large mandibular muscular attachments, right? This is our mandible, this is our maxilla, but to move our mandible, we use muscles that belong at our temple. They're attached to our temple, because that muscle is actually what pulls our jaw shut to allow us to chew. So, but when we start cooking our food, we no longer needed such mandibular muscular attachments in our temple area, allowing for more room for larger cranium, because we lacked so much muscle here. Like, look at a chimpanzee or gorilla, right? Their mandibular muscles actually protrude out of their skull, right? And in fact, mine do too. It actually protrudes. Look. You can't actually tell, but when I chew, it actually moves and it bulges out. So, I don't know. Maybe that makes me an idiot. Allowing for more room for a larger cranium and therefore a larger brain, Inter-Glacial, found in modern man. Now, the word Inter-Glacial is important here, right? Our large brains, Inter-Glacial in proportion to our bodies. Also, being such a good long-distance runner, able to chase down game, we Homo sapien, our brain cases expanded even further, giving Homo sapiens a much larger brain in proportion to our bodies than both the Neanderthal and Denisovan. And of course, the Homo erectus, which had a very small brain case and an even more sloping forehead, right? Probably wasn't as smart as the rest of us. Probably had massive mandibular attachments, like a chimpanzee. And obviously, since we were such good long-distance runners, able to chase down game and hunt, all that protein probably helped us grow our brains, the Homo sapiens. Same with Neanderthals and Denisovan, but we're talking about Homo sapiens. So notice how I say the words Inter-Glacial or in proportion to our bodies when talking about our brain cases, our large overdeveloped brain cases, when describing the brain case size of Homo sapiens in contrast to Neanderthals and Denisovan. This is because both the brain cases for Neanderthals and Denisovan were actually much larger than the Homo sapien. Both in volume and length, right? They got the large occipital bone in the back, they're massive. It's just that since Neanderthals and Denisovan have such robust and large faces, they have a longer face, right? A big mid-face section, big jaw area, big nose, big face, long face. Their brain case is much smaller than the Homo sapien when compared to the rest of their bodies, right? A big, stocky body. The Denisovan could have been massive too. We haven't really found their skeletons. They could have been massive. So in contrast, their brain cases were more smaller because we have small bodies and big heads, big brains. By having such a large cranium or brain case, a less muscular jaw, and a smaller lower face, a lower third face, by having smaller lower face, the Homo sapien embodies the Neotenous look of the modern man, right? That's why we know that we're Homo sapiens when we find archaic Homo sapien skulls, is because compared to Neanderthals and Denisovan skeleton structure and skull structure, we look like kids. We are Neotenous. Neoteny is when the species retains a look of prematurity way into adulthood, as if the skeleton never fully matures. Compared to Neanderthals and Denisovan, our faces and our bodies look childlike. Neoteny may have many evolutionary advantages in which I won't get into much detail here, but mostly Neoteny is correlated with high intellect, right? Smaller jaws, smaller muscles up here, more room for brain. High intelligence, and therefore the ability to plan for the future, right? It comes with high intelligence. Many things come with high intelligence, social intelligence, and planning for the future, Oh, it's going to get cold. Maybe we should store some food because, it's going to get cold. Foresight. What's interesting is that East Asians are the most Neotenous of all modern races. East Asians have relatively large, broad heads. I wish I had shorter hair so you could, I could use myself as an example. Minor brow ridges. That's very obvious. We do not have deep set eyes. In fact, they just kind of look like they're placed on our heads. Our eyes are not deep set. And less prominent nasal bridge. I'm not a good example for that, but mostly less prominent nasal bridges, if any, right? You look at some East Asians, their noses start here. You can, slide your finger right past here and, there'd be no nose here. And start here. It'd be a wide, short, flat nose. That's the common East Asian look. Contrast that to Jake Paul's side profile CT scan after his fight with Anthony Joshua. It stuck out to me immediately, right? When you look at, if you're into this, Jake Paul's CT scan after he fought Anthony Joshua and Anthony Joshua broke his jaw. They did a side profile of his CT scan and man, his nasal bridge is it looks like an entire nose. It looks like you could see the cartilage part too. That's how big just that nasal bridge part, because the bone ends here. The bone ends here and the rest is cartilage, right? So unlike Jake Paul's side, I just wanted to say this as a joke, it's funny, but unlike Jake Paul's side profile, obviously he's European, maybe he has European Neanderthal, of course he does, but East Asians don't have that. In fact, this Dragon Man doesn't even have that. A high nasal bridge. And we have relatively smaller frames. Asians have a small frame. That's another Neotenous look. Less muscular build. Focus the nutrition resources on building the brain, not building the body. By building the brain, we can be smart and invent tools and plan for the future and store food for the future. And that's how we stay alive instead of being a big brute and tackling wild game like Neanderthals, right? IQ tests aren't 100%, right? IQ tests aren't 100% surefire way to gauge intellect, but it is a gauge. There's a lot of nurture involved. So for example, maybe you've been brought up to problem solve and do math, arithmetics and stuff like that, reading comprehension, and you can build that trait, right? So a lot of it is nurture. For example, Asian culture values education and academia, right? If you're Asian, Asians, you know what I'm talking about, right? My parents would beat me because I didn't study hard enough. After school. This is after school, right? 2 hours of piano after school. 2 hours of math after school. I used to be in the IB program. I might not look like it, but I'm a big nerd, right? Obviously. They value education and academia, so maybe that could be genetics as well. Maybe genetics has a role to play in, your values, what you gravitate towards. What lifestyle are you gonna use to keep yourself alive? How are you going to make money? Are you going to be a laborer, a general laborer, a contractor, like a tradesman, working hard, doing construction? Or are you going to, use money magic, right? So Asian culture values education, academia, which might throw off IQ test results as a gauge for intellect, but basically East Asians. What I'm trying to say is, East Asians have the highest IQ score in the world. As East Asians, I don't know what it is, 140, 160 or something on average. Despite having rugged proto-human features from the Denisovan and perhaps the Homo erectus, the Dragon Man also shows Neotenous features. So this rugged caveman whose brow ridge comes up to here, sloping forehead, this caveman, this Denisovan, also has Neotenous features. He was a baby face. Being part Homo sapien, right? Adding to the Neotenous look and having high intellect. We knew that they were very smart. They made stone flake tools, double-edged stone flake tools with many. They made many chips to make these tools. It's a sign of more advanced tool making. They made stone flake tools similar to Neolithic man. Similar to tools we're finding, 20,000 years ago, right? So if the Dragon Man is an ancestor to much of Asia, can we see the rugged caveman-like features from Denisovan and Homo erectus in modern Asians? So do we see these traits in East Asians? Yeah. The answer is yes. Despite having larger brains and shorter faces, more squat faces, a Neotenous look, East Asians have many rugged caveman-like features as well, such as a sloping forehead. I always talk about this. I wish I didn't have so much hair right now, but if you notice, my forehead ends here. That's the top of my brain case in the front. My prefrontal cortex is not so developed. That's hard to show you, but this is all hair, man. The back of my skull might end here, but it slopes to the front like a gorilla. And by being I'm B positive blood type, it's actually linked to gorillas as well. But I'm not going to talk about that here. You got sloping foreheads, East Asians, relatively lower and flatter top of the skull. Or top of the skull doesn't go as high like Europeans. And we have a concave nasal bridge. Just like the Dragon Man, we have a concave nasal bridge. Flat nose, which is also found in East Asians, despite having shorter, less prominent chins. East Asians have a wider and muscular jaw compared to other phenotypes, right? In conclusion, despite having a massive skull and perhaps a massive body as well, we can only speculate, deriving from Denisovan, the Dragon Man also had a broad flat face, and a nasal bridge like the Homo erectus, or lack of a nasal bridge like the Homo erectus, and a fine and smaller but broad Neotenous face, and a finer face. Relatively large brain case and sloped forehead like the modern East Asian. So there's many traits of this Dragon Man that exists in East Asians today, just by looking at the skull. To me, not only is the Dragon Man a perfect ancestor to the modern East Asian, but also a significant part of the genetic ancestry and missing link to archaic ghost DNA found in proto-hominids from around the world. So we can use the Dragon Man's DNA to fill in missing links of not only East Asian populations, but of Neanderthal and proto-human populations from around the world. We can use this to fill in missing links. So, yeah, that's all about this Dragon Man found in northeast China. It's close to where my dad is from. My dad is from Heilongjiang, which means Black Dragon River. And in China, people from northern China, from around Manchuria, their DNA is different from people from other parts of China, right? You go to Western China, we have people with Indo-Aryan DNA. They're Muslim. They have blue eyes, green eyes. They don't look like Asians. Some of them have red hair. They look Arabic or Persian or white. You will know from my previous videos, especially the one talking about the giant white mummies found in the Tarim Basin, right? So, our human history is so complicated. And that's the end of this video, guys. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe. I'm not good at this. Please like, comment, and subscribe. This means everything to me, making these videos. This is the epitome of my life, man, sharing this knowledge with you guys. Because the days I'm not making these videos, I'm just thinking about them. And honestly, I get depressed when I don't make these videos when I know I should be. I don't get to talk about this with anybody. Most people are not interested. They tune out when I talk to them about it. And then knowing that, right now I got 20 people that have subscribed to me that find this information interesting. Maybe some of them I begged them to subscribe to me, but some of you I didn't. And you guys mean everything to me. Thanks for watching. I'm out.